Yellow and Red by Digits 27, Chapter 33. That's a cool name, Fu. What about your last name? Fu just shyly looked away, a single tear rolling from the corner of her eye like a lost gem. I don't know. I don't know who my parents were. Nobody ever told me. Nobody ever talks to me. Naruto nodded in understanding. It was the same with him. Although he at least had a last name to go on, it was a pain all orphans shared. The lack of knowing who you really are. While everybody created their own identities, there's always the craving to find out who you could have been, and where you fit in the world. A long time ago, Naruto had simply gritted his teeth and stopped thinking about it. He had his family, Gaara and Tayuya. His eyes watered just a little thinking about the girl in front of him. While people had saved him from himself at 7, she had nobody. He couldn't imagine being alone for so long and wondering what he would be like. It was depressing. It was a depressing line of thought and wouldn't do him any good. He instead focused on the girl in front of him that needed him now. Well, do you want to talk then? Fucha stared at him, a few emotions flashing across her malnourished features that Naruto couldn't quite catch. Most prominent through was her overwhelming suspicion over this whole situation. Why are you doing this to me? Naruto cringed. The untrusting words hurt him, but he had to push through. Like I said, we're the same. Fu's eyes narrowed, looking onto Naruto's own to try and understand what he was saying. What is that even supposed to mean? Naruto sighed wearily. This was going to take a long time. He stretched his back and shuffled backwards so he could lean against the wall. Fu seemed cautious of the movement, but tried not to show it. Fu, what do you know about Biju? The girl looked at the ground, obviously thinking about the question. She couldn't place it, but the word seemed familiar. She shook her head, and Naruto sighed. It just got a lot harder. Okay. The Biju are like these giant creatures made from chakra. He looked up at her from across the room. You do know what chakra is, right? The girl just nodded, irritating, and Naruto held his hand up in a placating manner. Okay, sorry, just checking. He chuckled, and Action Fu wasn't sure what to think of. She had never really heard another person laugh honestly, only when they were thinking of something malice. Even so, she didn't believe that Naruto was doing anything or thinking of anything bad for her. The Biju are very powerful. Their power is shown through the number of tails they have, from 1 to 9. A lot of people try to control their power, but the only way they can do this is to seal the Biju inside of humans. Fu's eyes began to narrow as she thought about Naruto's words more. The people they seal the creatures inside are called Jinchuriki, the power of a human sacrifice. Now Fu was really starting to panic. Why are you telling me this? What does this have to do with us? Naruto looked at her pleadingly for a moment, the panicked and untrusting tone in her voice cutting him like a knife. He sighed and went to lift up his shirt. Fu flinched, but he just held up a hand to show he wasn't doing anything to hurt her. He lifted up his shirt so that he could see the intricacy, so that she could see the intricacy on his stomach. She blushed a little at seeing his toned body, but became curious about the markings. What's that tattoo mean? Naruto chuckled. He suggested one could mistake it for a tattoo. Of course, those didn't disappear when you stopped channeling chakra into them. That is the seal that keeps the QB, the 9 tails, inside of my body. Fu let out another startled gasp, but instead of frightened, he had expected she was more curious. So you're Jinchuriki? The Naruto chuckled again, a warm laugh that held no negative intent whatsoever. Jinchuriki? And yes. The QB was sealed in my body when I was just a baby by the 4th Hokage of the Leaf Village. Fu frowned as she rubbed her own stomach. So you think I'm a Jinchu thing as well? Naruto nodded, this time looking down sadly. My village hated me too. They believed I was the creature sealed inside of me. They ignored me, beat me, called me names like demon or freak. Fu's eyes opened wide. Naruto might as well have been explaining her own life to her. From what I know, it's the same for all of us. If we weren't hated, we are feared or exploited for our powers. The village keeps us like we're some kind of weapons, hating our very existence while expecting us to value their own enough to die for them. My best friend Gaara is the Jinchuriki of the Ichibi. His village tried to raise him into their ultimate weapon. Why are you here, though? Why are you telling me this? Naruto's eyes came up, determination burning in them. Because nobody should have to live that kind of life, scrounging for any warmth and carrying with that we can. And he stood up in the small room, and Fu for once didn't flinch. That's why I came to find you, to help you. He took a few steps forward, and Fu still didn't move. I can take you away from here, take you to somewhere where you won't be hated, where you can have friends and people that care about you. He crossed the distance until he was right next to her. You can be one of my precious people. He held out his arm, and the small girl nervously took his hand. And then you can start having your own precious people. The smile he gave her warmed Fu's heart a little. Naruto just had a way of expressing all his positive emotions in a single grin. Fu couldn't help the smile that touched her own lips, a smile that hadn't seen the light of day for far too long. Suddenly, all that time she had spent hiding her emotions, protecting herself from other people, and shielding herself away, all of that came crumbling down. She moved on the instincts of a child and threw herself forward, barreling into Naruto on a bear hug. Her small arms didn't quite make it around Naruto's body, but she gave it her best, and after a moment of surprise, Naruto hugged back. "Thank you." Naruto looked at Fu and saw she had a few new streaks running down her face, the light silvery lines just catching the moonlight as she cried in happiness. He smiled again and just waited until the small girl let him go. She stood and wiped the last of the tears from her face with her forearm. "But how are we going to get out of the village? I tried before and the shinobi just took me back." Naruto's kindly smile turned into a foxy grin. "Don't worry about that. Now you have me." He turned around so he didn't miss. The slightly odd expression on Fu's face. She had never had anybody in her life, not like this before. The tuck cage was nice to her and did his best to protect her, but he was always busy, and they never saw each other that much. Naruto turned back around, seemingly focused on something in his head before his eyes opened, and he nodded happily. "All right, we're good to go. I need you to hop on my back and hold on tight." To emphasize this, he turned around and crouched down. Fu didn't move for a moment, but when Naruto turned around with that warm, comforting smile, she quickly clambered onto his back. "Okay, this is going to feel weirder. Try not to throw up if you can." Fu stared sternly at the back of his head, as best a small child could. Whatever it was he had planned, she was ready for it if it meant escaping the village. She suddenly felt a tingling sensation skip across her skin, like being slightly electrocuted. Her world went a little fuzzy for a few moments, but when it snapped back into focus, she was shocked to see trees surrounding her. Naruto carefully lowered the girl off of his back. She was still just a little dizzy from a long-range teleport. He smiled as he pulled the kunai out of the bark and resealed it in his wrist. At least now he knew the Fujin no Iki worked at long distance. Fu was just staring around her in awe at the trees. She had never really been up close to the smaller versions of their sacred tree before. She had seen them when she tried to run out of the village, but she hadn't gotten close enough. She walked up to one and lightly placed her hand on the bark, running her small fingers over its rough surface. Naruto looked at her with an amused smirk, but said nothing. He had no idea how much the village had screwed up the girl's life. "There, out of the village. How easy was that?" Naruto couldn't help the satisfied smirk that crossed his mouth for a moment. "How did you do that? What did you do?" Naruto placed a conspiratory finger to his nose. "It's a secret." Fu just pouted, and Naruto found it cute, chuckling to himself. "Maybe I'll tell you later." Fu seemed visibly brightened at that. She had essentially lived some kid's dream to teleport instantly. "So are you a ninja?" Naruto nodded as she checked some of his supplies. Sometimes he lost things going through the seals. "So can all ninja do that?" Naruto just grinned to himself. "Nope, only 2 people have ever been able to do what I just did, me and the 4th Hokage." Fu looked around the forest as she spoke, but still listened intently. "The man who made you a Jinchiwawa?" Naruto nodded again, this time a little more grimly. Fu caught onto the discomfort and tried to change the subject. "So, are you still kind of freelance ninja if you aren't in Taki?" Naruto just chuckled and looked at her in amusement. She was so like him when he tried to escape Konoha. "No, I'm from one of the other villages." The girl looked shocked and a little odd. "There are other ninja villages?" Naruto nodded happily, finishing up on his supply check. "Yeah, a lot more. Hop on my back so we can get going and I'll tell you about them." Fu did as she was asked, and soon they were soaring through the trees, surprising Fu at how fast Naruto could move. Even for a ninja, Naruto was fast, and right now he was toning it down so as not to scare Fu. As he ran, he explained the other villages, how there were five main ones, and all the other nations that didn't have ninja villages hired them for jobs and contracts. Fu actually seemed a little happy that Takagaku wasn't a major village. They had always tried to stress to her the importance of the village in the world. Naruto growled as he knew they were just trying to make her loyal to the village and help her in becoming a weapon. He had wondered why she wasn't more knowledgeable on these things, but now he would have to start in the Ninja Academy in Konoha. It turned out she was 11 and would have started her training this year if Naruto hadn't come. Intake girls start their ninja training after the men. It didn't make a lot of sense that way, Fu explained it, but he got the general idea. They were fairly chauvinistic. Naruto was a stamina beast, but even he had his limits, especially when carrying somebody on his back. Even though Fu was very light from her age and generally thinness, the extra weight still pulled him down. The two settled down in a clearing and Naruto went about preparing everything they needed. Fu watched him in awe as he set up the fire and pulled out some meat and vegetables from a scroll in his pouch. She marveled at how completely self-reliant he was, and at every turn was asking him questions about how or why he did one thing or another. Naruto was more than happy to answer all her questions. The last few days on his own had been pretty quiet, and he was more than happy for the company. By the time night came, he was already beginning to feel sleepy, and Fu looked almost dead on her feet. They had both been through a lot that day, and were smiling at the thought of finally resting. Fu surprised him by asking if she could sleep next to him. She didn't want to be alone at night. He smiled softly, like a parent might do their children when told they had a bad dream, and just nodded. He didn't see the harm in it. He slept with Tia anyway, and his nights had been a bit lonelier than he was used to. Fu surprised him. He had thought she would be cold and distant towards him, maintaining her layers and barriers of distrust to try and keep him away. Instead, she seemed to be practically latching onto him like she had finally found somebody who showed her care and warmth, and never wanted to let them go. Naruto had no idea of the truth in his thoughts. It was exactly how Fu felt when Naruto looked at her. She had found the big brother she never had, and right now she would fight before somebody let her be taken from him. Naruto settled down and instinctively wrapped his arm around Fu like he would Tayuya. The girl didn't mind in the slightest and held onto his arm like a stuffed animal. Naruto would have smiled at the childlike way she behaved if he hadn't already drifted off into sleep, the familiar sounds of wind from his own mind growing louder. He sat up in the grassy clearing to an incredibly strange sight. Kyubi was across from him in her human form, and she wasn't alone. After the incident with Itachi, he had never seen her reassume the visage. He had asked her why she didn't, but she said it had its uses and they were uncommon. His gaze drifted across to the other occupant of his mind, someone he was pretty sure shouldn't have been in here. It was a she, could definitely tell that much. She was also young, or at least young-looking, considering she was somehow in his mindscape. She had bright green hair that spiked out down her back, that perfectly matched her emerald orbs of eyes. She had a bright, smiling face, and Naruto could just tell, as one of those people, that she was naturally excitable. She wore a bandana around her neck and a white tank top that cut off just above her navel. Below that, she wore some almost indecently short shorts. Other than that, she was barefoot. Another very prominent feature were the 6 enormous wings that spread from the girl's back, 3 on either side. They looked like they belonged on an insect, thin and transparent, with faint veins crisscrossing its surface. In fact, they looked exactly how Naruto remembered dragonflies from his younger days in Konoha. The girl also had a long green ribbon-like tail, also looking befitting of an insect. It wound away behind her, the same color as her hair. She was talking with Kyubi across the clearing, but when she spotted Naruto, she squealed courteously and brushed over incredibly quickly. But before Naruto knew what was happening, he felt his face being pressed into 2 very warm and soft globs as the girl hugged him ecstatically. He flushed bright red at the close proximity to the woman's breast, but after a moment of the two, he started to gasp for air and wondered if she was still trying to kill him. She finally let him part from her, only to look down at him with her wide green eyes and a cheerful smile. Hello? The girl's grin grew larger, but by this time Kyubi had made her way over. Naruto, say hello to my sister of sorts, Chome. Naruto nodded politely in the girl's direction, wondering what the hell was going on. Ah, you're right, Kurama. He is cute. Naruto blushed again as the vibrant girl spoke about him. Kyubi, what's going on? The vixen just sighed and placed her forehead in her palm. Fu, the one you rescued from Takakuri, is the container of the 7 tails. Kochome here. The hypergirl did a small curtsy at the mention of her name, going off in a fit of giggles afterwards. She always was the most carefree of the family. Chome just nodded happily. You humans are always so down to earth. I couldn't imagine being stuck to the ground all day. It would be just so boring. Kyubi sent her a slightly irritated look, much like siblings do. So you're the Nanabi? Chome nodded again, her smile still shining. So why does Kyubi call you Chome? The energetic girl sent him a funny look, her mouth twitching up at the side. Because that's my name, or at least a close human approximation. It would take mandibles to say it properly. She chuckled lightly at her own joke, sounding like 1,000 crickets chirping. Naruto frowned. He had heard Kyubi called the Ichibi Shukaku, but he had always thought that was a name. Thought that was a name humans had given him. His eyes opened wide. Wait, did you call Kyubi Kurama? Chomei chuckled again, glancing between the red-haired vixen and her jailer. Of course. What am I supposed to call her? Naruto just stared at Kyubi, a little angry and slightly hurt. You've had a name this entire time, and you never told me. Kurama just shrugged, not looking particularly bothered by the accusatory tone. It didn't seem that important. Naruto huffed, pointing slightly, which both of the Biju just raised their eyes at. It's not even my real name. Like Chomei, it's just an approximation. It's just an approximation. Naruto still had his arms crossed, but at least he stopped potting. So what are you doing in my head, Chomei? The green-haired girl flopped down onto the grass and laughed. I wanted to say hi. I've been bored out of my mind for the past 11 years. Naruto joined her on the ground, soon followed by Kurama, but in a much more graceful manner. Why didn't you talk to Fu? He was curious because Kurama had been talking to him since he was 7. The green-haired girl just shot a look at the Kyubi. It looked like jealousy. Not all of us are lucky enough to be sealed by an altered 8-element seal that they can easily pass their chakra through. Kurama just shrugged nonchalantly, looking bored with the conversation already. I have to wait until little Fu is able to contact me before I can even whisper in her direction. Never mind, pass on chakra. Naruto nodded in understanding. He already knew that each Jinchuriki was most likely sealed differently, as Gaara's seal was vastly different to his own. This is going to sound weird, but why are you a human right now? Chomi just looked down at the ground sheepishly. It was the only way I could trick the seal temporarily and allow me to establish this mental link. Naruto nodded again. He couldn't say he understood, but it seemed a little like a valid answer. Even though by the way Kyubi stared at her, he could tell there was more to it. He was satisfied now and prepared to back out of his mindscape and get some sleep, but before he could, Chomi put a hand on his shoulder. Tell Fu I'm sorry about the way she gets treated and give her a great big hug from me. Naruto once again found his head enveloped in warm and soft woman flesh as Chobi pulled him into her cleavage again in a very over-enthusiastic hug. Naruto woke groggily, quite unlike him, as he was usually fairly alert in the mornings. He quickly figured out why when he realized it was still dark. He may have been a morning person, but by the position of the moon, it could only have been about 4 in the morning. That was pushing it. He rolled himself onto his back, quickly realizing that Fu was nowhere to be seen. He shot up from under the blanket onto his feet, eyes already darting outbound. He sensed the chakra not too far away and sprinted off in that direction, taking to the trees to get there quicker. He covered the distance in seconds, literally appearing on the branch that the girl was sitting on in a blur. He nearly fell from her branch in shock at his sudden arrival, but he steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. Fu, what are you doing out here? You scared me when I woke up and you were gone. Fu nearly cried when she heard that. She never had somebody who was concerned for her. The feeling was foreign and strange. Sorry. She hung her head, and Naruto instantly felt bad for insinuating she had done something wrong. He looked around, and as far as he could tell, she was just sitting up here looking at the moon. He lifted her chin with a finger and wiped the few stray hands of hair away from her eyes. He idly mused that she would have to get a hair clip or something. It's all right. I was just worried about you. That time Fu did let out a tear. All of this was just as so overwhelming for the Nana Bijin Cherokee. Somebody actually cared about her, and not just as a weapon or in falsehood to gain her trust. What were you doing out here? Fu looked away embarrassed. I don't sleep that much, usually only a few hours a day. Naruto thought that was fairly interesting and wondered if it had something to do with her tenant. He would find it pretty useful. More time awake meant more time to train or do other things. Or do other things in. But why did you come all the way out here? Fu just shrugged, which made Naruto's eyebrows rise in amusement. He could hardly talk, as he was known for his own random whims. It's peaceful up here. Naruto nodded. He had agreed with her. It was nighttime, as so the birds were quiet. All you could hear was the wind moving between the branches of the trees and the gentle buzzing of insects. Oh, come on. Now that we're both up, we might as well get moving again. We haven't even passed into the land of hot water yet. Fu nodded happily. Riding on Naruto's back as he sprinted across trees was her new favorable hobby. It was incredible. She hoped that one day he could teach her how to do it. It would get her closer to the sky, and for some reason she felt more at peace the further from the ground she was. Naruto packed up the camp, and soon they were back to it, sprinting across the countryside, just skimming the borders of Fire and the Sound Country. He made sure to be careful. He knew this whole area could be patrolled by both Konoha and Oto Shinobi alike, and Naruto didn't fancy having to explain why he was passing through either territory. It took a few hours, but they finally passed into the land of hot water. Naruto could tell because the air got colder, and the air was beginning to thin as the terrain moved uphill. He could have stopped in the Yukagari, but Naruto was making very good time, and he wanted to get across the land of frost before night came. Otherwise, there would be trouble. They stopped when they had to eat, but other than that, Naruto was locked in a dead run with Fu on his back for the entire day. She enjoyed having the extreme piggyback, but she also felt a little useless, like a dead weight holding Naruto back. She didn't know that was true, but she still felt bad for it. Anyway, by the time they passed into Frost Country, Naruto already began to feel himself tired. His muscles were slowing down, and persistent chill in the air didn't help things at all. Usually this journey would have been nothing for him, but with the cold and the weight on his back, he was definitely beginning to struggle. It also didn't particularly help that occasionally he was forced to trudge through large snowdrifts. He sighed to himself, deeply creating a mist of steam in front of him from his warm body. In Konoha, it was summer now, yet here he was already knee-deep in copious amounts of snow and ice. He worried for Fu. She wasn't particularly dressed for snow. The thin clothing he had lent her not really covering her body the necessary amount. He was okay. Kyuubi's and his chakra kept him warm, circulating in his body, but he wasn't sure if the same could be said for Fu. She hadn't complained yet, but when he felt her give a small shiver from his back, he gritted his teeth and increased his pace. He didn't want to be the reason for her getting hypothermia, as he started channeling Kyuubi's chakra to both keep him and she was more curious to keep him awake and to increase his speed. Fu didn't know what was going on with Naruto. She was more curious about the fact that she didn't feel nearly as cold as she thought she should have. They were surrounded by snow, but she only felt like she was standing outside in a windy day. She also wondered if it had something to do with what Naruto had told her about herself. He didn't look cold in the slightest, but when she shivered, she felt him tense from her position on his back. Suddenly, Naruto's back seemed to warm up almost imperceptibly, and Fu was overcome with a wave of comfort. Naruto just seemed to be exuding an aura that made Fu feel perfectly safe and at home. She couldn't explain it, but maybe if she asked him, he could. She decided against it, though. He seemed to be concentrating even more now, picking up the pace. Naruto, where are we going? I thought you said you lived in Sunagakure. Isn't it supposed to be hot there? Naruto chuckled, but because of the chakra he was channeling, it came out slightly deeper than normal. Fu still felt okay with it. It just seemed powerful and comforting. Well, we aren't going to Suna. Well, we will eventually, but we can't go there for a while. Naruto didn't need to see her to know Fu was giving him a puzzled expression. I'm on a training trip right now. I can't go back to Suna for 2 years. Right now we're heading for Kumagakure, and it's colder because it's up in the mountains. Fu grumbled a bit. While she didn't hate the cold, she also couldn't say she liked it either. Naruto heard this and chuckled again, earning even more grumbling from his passenger. He was distracted, so he didn't notice the slightly different shine in the snow ahead, which ended up with him tripping over the protruding metal bar. He and Fu both went crashing into the snow, with Fu getting off light thanks to being on Naruto's back. He picked himself up, brushing off the snow and murmuring about distracting women before examining what he had tripped on. He had heard the metallic ring as his foot had struck it, but wondered what it could be so far out here in the wilderness. He brushed some snow away from the bar and stared at it strangely, noticing its twin 2 feet away. The two metal bars lay in parallel with one another, both stretching off in either direction under the snow. He brushed away the snow in between them to find wooden planks at regular intervals, perpendicular between the bars. He just stared at the strange sight, never having seen anything like it before. Well, that actually wasn't entirely true. What is it? Naruto shook his head, shrugging his shoulders as he did so. I don't know. I guess it kind of looks like the tracks for the mine carts back in the mines at Suna, but much bigger. He wondered at the size. Of the thing that must ride on the tracks. The tracks were 3 times the size of the corresponding mine cart tracks. Come on, we should keep moving before you catch a cold or something. Fu nodded, but was still staring at the frozen metal strangely. Naruto picked her back up and sprinted on, both quickly moving on in their thoughts from the strange sight. A few hours later, and they were both out of the endless snowbanks and frozen lakes of Frost Country. In a way, with its bleakness and monochrome nature, it had reminded him a lot of the deserts in one country, just much colder. Finally, though, they started to see rocky outcropping emerge from the snow at intervals until eventually they were rid of it completely. Except, of course, they were left with something worse, a blanket of mist that descended over the area, and it was only by Naruto's exceptional map skills did he keep them on the right track. That and the fact they were just following a road. With a chuckle, Naruto remembered the conversation he had with Kurama all those years ago. He now understood the concept of condensation and realized that they were walking through mist. But now they weren't walking through mist, but clouds. He relayed his information to Fu, who for some reason was overjoyed at the prospect she was walking through clouds, or running as the case may be. Naruto just shrugged. If they were in the clouds, then Kumo couldn't have been far away. After an hour of stumbling around, near blind thanks to the cloud coverage all around him, Naruto began to get annoyed. This place could rival Kirigakure in its difficulty to find. The area also had begun to get noticeably thin, even though the few scarce people they came across didn't seem affected in the slightest. They got a few strange looks as they walked through a village. After all, a blonde 14-year-old with a strange ninja headband giving a high-speed piggyback to a mint-haired girl with caramel skin wasn't exactly a common occurrence. With an enormous sigh of relief, they finally seemed to get above the clouds, a fact Naruto thought he would never be experiencing. The sight that they caught though was even more breathtaking than the lack of air at this altitude. Stretching out in front of them was a multitude of mountainous peaks, possibly thousands of feet high. The village seemed to be built into the mountains themselves, with circular wooden structures encircling the peaks. In the center of it all was the largest mountain Naruto has ever seen, or probably ever would, engulfed by an intricate and massive glass sheath of a building. Large walkways were built in between the peaks, but it was obvious most of the village itself was built inside the mountains, offering the ultimate defense of nature. Naruto could also see many gardens and training grounds built atop the mountains, with a few radio antennas thrown in as well. The sight was really unlike anything Naruto had ever seen in his life, and he was just now starting to understand how unique the hidden villages were. Well, Fu, welcome to Kumakakure. He smirked at her awe expression before setting off towards the inspiring sight. End of chapter 33.